Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. For those of you who are regular listeners, you might be expecting me to talk about the release process of my game today. I just released it on Friday, so it would make sense for me to dig deep on it. But as mentioned previously, we are not talking about that today. We are talking about a nice, spooky Halloween game. We are going in on Splatterhouse 3. For those of you who are new, this is Game Develop Repeat. It's the podcast where we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we as game developers can learn from it. And boy, is Splatterhouse 3 a special game, and is there a lot to learn from it. I love this game. I played it at too young of an age, so there may be a certain element of nostalgia in there. And I say too young of an age because this game is quite gory. This game is quite violent. This game is quite intense. It has powerful themes. It has a lot going on in it, and there's a lot to learn from it. And I love this game maybe more than I should. I haven't even beaten it, but I played it a lot. I've been replaying it the last few days. It's been hype. It's been exciting, and I'm excited to share my thoughts and the lessons that I'm learning from it with you. All that being said, I'm your host, Chris. I'm a music educator turned indie game developer. And as I mentioned, today's episode is all about Splatterhouse 3. Let's get to it. As part of spooky season, as a way of celebrating Halloween, I pulled out the old Sega Genesis. I got it working on a CRT and started playing Splatterhouse 3. I may end up playing more Sega games and talking about them on this show. The nostalgia trip was crazy. There is just something powerful about pulling out a console from your childhood. This was my first console. So it was really quite the kick. Like it really awoke my nostalgia. But let's focus in on the spooky side of things. Let's focus in on this specific game rather than talking about all the other games which I could potentially cover in the future. So Splatterhouse 3 is gory. First off, we should acknowledge that right from the beginning. It is a violent game, it is a dark game, and it is almost in the same category as like a movie like Hellraiser, where everything is just like really uncomfortably gross, right? Now that may make you think of that genre in general and make you think, oh, so it's a shallow game that has nothing to offer but a violent aesthetic. And that, I think, misses the point of this game. I think it's easy to glance at it and go, oh, okay, it's just gory. And that's a risk you run when you go that deep into that kind of a look. But I believe that Splatterhouse 3 is, for me, one of the most emotionally impactful in terms of like terrifying, creepy, scary games that I've ever played. The other game that hits that hard would be Alien Isolation. I cannot play that game. I literally cannot play that game. I get like 2 hours in, maybe not even, and the sound design just destroys me. Like I cannot get through it because the sound design is so intense and so immersive. But anyway, Splatterhouse. What makes this game so compelling? What makes this game so powerful to me? It's the visual is a big part of it. Oh, by the way, this is kind of a side-scrolling beat 'em up where you're in your house and it has been like attacked by demons and you're trying to rescue your family, right? And you're wearing this mask that like talks to you and is helping you get through all the demons. So you're going through and you're fighting these demon zombie things, and the artwork is phenomenal. The combat is pretty simple but pretty satisfying. What makes the game so good is not the combat, it's not the art, it's not the animation. I mean, those are all feeding into it, but what really puts it over the top for me is the timer. There's a timer in this game. I am not a person who likes timers. Growing up, I hated it. I couldn't stand it. When I played Final Fantasy VIII, I set all the timers to max on any mission that gave you a timer choice. I don't like being locked in under time constraints, but I love this timer because the consequences of the timer are great. If you fail, there are consequences. There are game story consequences, but they're interesting anyway. If you succeed, there are still consequences. The game really has high stakes. Everything that happens around this timer, if you really, really excel, it rewards you. If you go way too slowly, it punishes you. If you are playing this game too cautiously, you will feel the consequences because you were trying to save people. You're trying to get out of there. You're trying to save your family, and you've only got so much time. And the scale of those consequences, at least at the beginning of the game, is very personal. It's like, this is you and your family, right? This is a very relatable story. The consequences are locked in and tight and close to you, and it's easy to get invested, and it's easy to care about, even though it's not that much of a storyline, right? It's not that expansive. You're not like reading pages and pages and pages of stuff. It's like old school Sega Genesis. They only had so much space on the cartridge. Like, it's pretty locked in. And I guess what I'm getting at with that is scale matters a lot with story and with my level of investment in it. If this game opened with, you need to kill these demons to save the world, I would not like the game as much as I do. But because it opens with, you need to kill these demons to save your family, and then it gives you punishments based on your performance, and the results of everything are changed. There are different endings, right? Like it's got a nice, small, tight little gameplay loop that is very easy to understand and very easy to impact. Like, you feel like, if I don't do this well enough, it is on me. It's not the game design. The game design is set up for me to succeed or fail, and I've got to get really good really quickly, and I've got to not fail these people. That's incredible, and that is what makes this game so terrifying to me. It is not the aesthetic. The aesthetic helps. The aesthetic is like, oh God, I have to fight these horrifying things. But the real terror in it is in the fact that you may not be able to save your family, right? Think about the emotional impact of that. Like, think about the story that they're setting you up for. Is the scary part of the game really the demons and the blood and the gore? No, that's just frosting. The real terror of the game is the emotion that it is putting you through when you are or are not able to save one of your family members. That's the scary part. It just so happens that you're doing it while fighting against gory demons and stuff. Let's talk about gore for a second. Really, like, gory games. I think this varies by person. I don't really care about gore. Like, it's not something where I like go play a game because it's gory. I feel like it has to serve a purpose. I don't know. I'm sure there are cases in which it's just like, oh, this game is really gory and I love it for that, and that's fantastic. I'm sure there are people who view it that way, and cool. I just happen to not be that way. I think that it needs to serve a greater greater purpose within the game. It needs to serve the story, it needs to serve the gameplay, it needs to have some kind of function. There are some pretty gross games that it's completely fine to be that they're gross because of how it ties into everything else. There's this game called it's like Lisa I forget what the subtitle is, but it's this platformer that's like really dark and unhappy and all that and depressing and kind of comedy spin to it. It's really gross too in its own way, and I can appreciate that. And then there's something like oh man, what is it? Fear and Hunger? Is that the name of that one? I think it's Fear and Hunger. Let me check. I'm going to pause for one moment. Fear and Hunger. That's another game that uses gore and uses like grossness for a purpose. Games that get super gross, super disturbing, they need to do it for a purpose. And sometimes that purpose is to make you wildly uncomfortable, which is what Fear and Hunger does. And sometimes the purpose is just like a weird gag or like a comedy thing or like a world building thing. But as long as it's not just we like gore, I'm fine with it. If it's just, oh, I kind of like gore, I just like it to be a violent game, then I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Maybe that's for somebody, but it's not for me. And I think it's easy to look at Splatterhouse. This is the point I was getting to. I think it's easy to look at Splatterhouse and think, oh, this is just a game for people who like gore, right? But I don't think it is. I think it's that's just an element of it, and I think the real kind of like I think it really is just serving something else. I don't think it is the main purpose of the game. I think it's an aspect of the game that is serving the rest of the game and the gameplay and the vibe and all that stuff. I haven't played the remake of Splatterhouse. I've heard about that. It was on PS3. I don't have a PS3, so I never played it. Apparently, it wasn't that well received, but I don't, you never know. Maybe I would have liked it anyway. So I don't know if they kind of have the same impact, like in terms of story structure and consequence and all of that good stuff. So I can't speak to that game. If you look into Splatterhouse, you may run into that. Splatterhouse 3 is kind of hard to get access to. It's one of those expensive old Genesis games. I think it may have been included in that re-release, though. I think in that PS3 version of Splatterhouse, I think they may have the original trilogy on the disc, and there may be some kind of digital re-releases. I'm not sure. I haven't dug into that, but it's worth looking into because it is a cult classic, and if this series interests you, you may be able to track it down in an affordable way. What else did I have? I had one more point. The soundtrack to this game is phenomenal, and it really gives you a little sense of unease. Even when you finish levels, it plays this little riff that makes you feel like, yeah, I finished the level, but we're still here. Like, this is rough. This is still bad. It's like a celebratory riff that is kind of upsetting. Throughout the game, it just makes you feel a little uneasy, a little bit like everything's wrong, everything's not great. It's still got high energy, though. It's not that spooky, scary soundtrack where it's just like, oh, here's a low tone droning forever. It's not that. It's got energy. It's got a little power behind it. It's got a little passion. It's got a little movement while still being spooky, which I really respect. I believe I've covered everything that I want to in this chunk. The one thing I want to reiterate is there's a difference between a scary game to play and a scary thing to look at. There's a difference between scary gameplay and scary vibes, right? Scary aesthetic. And this game executes on scary gameplay, which is incredible to me, and the aesthetic. But I would argue it does the gameplay element more effectively than the aesthetic. Now, once you get really used to the game, once you figure it out, once you kind of min-max your play style and all this stuff, then I'm sure it'll get less scary. But when you're initially learning the game, it is like, oh God, what's going to happen? And that's impressive. I really appreciate when a game commits to a specific emotion in its gameplay. That impresses me a lot. I think that shows an incredible understanding of game design, and I really would like to keep trying to learn how to do that. So let's talk about that. So this terrifying gameplay that they set up, how are they doing this? How can we do this in our own projects? What is going on here? I've touched on a few of these things a little bit, but let's dive deeper. Let's dive into setting up consequences. I think that it is essential that the consequences of your player's play style are, if there are consequences, are extremely clear. And if you can have them tightly bound to their play style, all the better. I think a big part of this game is it's got a 7-minute timer for every level or less. Like, it's got these short timers. I haven't beaten every level, I shouldn't say that, but it's got these fairly short timers that have you locked in and say, you are going to know very quickly whether or not you've done something right. Each room that you clear, you can go, wow, that room took me way too long, or wow, that room was quick enough. And you got to map through, and like you have a few decisions you're making, and you see the consequences of your actions very, very quickly. I think that's powerful in terms of making the gameplay feel emotional. Having it be clear what your consequences are. You'll have JRPGs where you change a whole bunch of stats, you change a whole bunch of equipment, whatever, and you can't tell what the consequence is. You're just like, I guess I'm more powerful, right? But you weren't losing before. Now you're just winning a little faster until you hit some big boss and you got a whole thing, right? But then some of the JRPGs I really like have these tight consequences where it's like, you are geared up wrong. You have the wrong people in your party. You are going to lose. You're not getting there. You're dead. You're done, right? And then you learn how to play the game. Like, you have to figure it out. I think this is one of the reasons why people love the Dark Souls games, is because they have very quick, powerful feedback. They tell you exactly what you're doing wrong. You find out very quickly what you need to do right. And then it's a matter of executing, which is a whole other thing. I think that if you want the gameplay itself to feel really like deeply rewarding and important and potentially have an emotional impact, I think the consequences of your actions are extremely important. And I mean the moment to moment, not just the larger scale. It has the whole story structure. It has the, oh, you failed this, so now we're going to punish you, but the game is going to keep moving ahead. That's great. I especially like that it doesn't just make you reset the level whenever you fail the timer. That is huge for me. If it makes you reset the level whenever you fail the timer, I'm just like, come on. I beat it, though. I got through. I was just a little slow. But if it says, yeah, you won, but now you got to deal with what happens, I like that. I can get behind that. But it's not just that. It is also, oh, you missed a punch. You just lost half your health bar, right? It's also, oh, you jumped and you got hit in midair. That's going to be 10 seconds. If you hadn't jumped, it would have been like a second. If you die, it's like, oh, you're watching that timer go down because you died and you're just waiting for your guy to come back, and it's going to be like 10 seconds. And you know the whole time that it's happening, you know that you could be saving someone's life right now, but you messed up. Like, it all ties together really beautifully. And it doesn't have to all tie together, but I do think that in order to teach the player how to play the game and how to enjoy the game, there have to be clear cause and effect. There have to be clear, like, causal chains, right? And it has to be very obvious to the player how they can have an impact on stuff. This is one of the issues with multiple endings in games for me personally. Every single decision I make in the game, I'm like, is this going to have an impact or not? I have no idea. And like, I don't want to replay a 50-hour game to find out that only one decision had the impact. I need to know after I made the decision if it had an impact. And I need to not like a prompt that says, hey, this is going to affect your end game. I need it to be clear in a way that is consistent with the world. That's my takeaway from this game. That's my takeaway. And my other takeaway is you don't have to open with let's save the world. Open with like save the family. I would argue that you don't even have to open. You don't even have to close with save the world. I would argue that the whole story can just be about a family. The whole story can just be about one thing that's pretty impactful. To take a completely different angle on this, look at A Short Hike. That game is an emotional journey, and it is entirely about a character going on a hike and not having phone reception. And it's incredible. And I love that story, and I will take that story any day over you need to save the entire world. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, you know? Like, we all get tired of the epic storyline, and I get it. It creates these massive, incredible set pieces. It creates this high stakes thing. It's really cool. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with that. I can't wait to play Final Fantasy 16 because it looks like it's going to have this very large scale thing. It's going to have like really, really big, beautiful set pieces and like all this cool stuff. Like, I can't wait for that. But personally, I like a small scale story. I like a tight story. I like something that's just about people, just about characters, just about like human interaction or like a community. Stardew Valley, that is a good scope. That is a crazy good story scope because you have an impact. You have an impact that is actually humanly possible within a community. One person in a community can have a huge impact on everybody around them. That is fairly realistic in terms of scale, but it's still kind of grand. You are saving this community center, right? You're doing all this stuff to save. Obviously, it's kind of like magical and whatever, right? But in terms of the scale of it, you're not saving the whole world, but you are having a massive positive impact on the community. And if any of you have ever met, like, there are people who can just have this really big impact on an area, like or on a school or on there's a lot more power that an individual person can have on their environment than I think we realize, and it's cool when a story explores that. And of course, I'm talking about Stardew. It always I can't, if I mention Stardew, I can't prevent myself. I like have to go in on it. That's one of the things about that game that makes it so charming, is it is an impact that feels possible. And saving the whole world never feels possible. Everybody wants to save the world, whatever. When you're playing the game, you're like, oh, look, I saved the whole world. It's not relatable. If you play the game and go, wow, I've saved this community. I've built these places for people to connect to each other. I've supported them all. I've helped so much. That feels kind of possible. Like, you walk away from that and go, hey, maybe I can do something, right? It's inspiring. I'm a big fan of that one. Anyway, last little bit about development we went from Splatterhouse 3 to Stardew Valley. That is classic how my brain works. Okay, back to Splatterhouse 3. One more thing to learn from it is doing more with less. This game does not have a lot of enemies, but it does cool things with them, right? This game does not have a lot of levels, but it does cool things with them. It ramps up the intensity. It has the multiple ending thing. It has this tight game that does a lot. It has a strong impact. It doesn't need to be massive. I keep saying that. I think that's me projecting the fact that my next game idea is too big, and I'm obsessed with the idea that I need to scope it down, and I'm hoping that I can. I think I'm projecting that into this episode a little bit, but we're going to keep going. Splatterhouse 3 doesn't need to be huge. It has a certain amount of art, it has a certain amount of music, and it has like so many levels. That's it. It's pretty linear with a few forks in the road. Sometimes we think about branching paths and separate endings and all this stuff, and we think, oh, I need 100 different endings. You might just need a shorter game with like 4 endings that hit really hard and that the player has very direct control over. I think that's one of the things that this executes so beautifully on. Let's talk very quickly. I just mentioned my brainstorming thing that is going on. Let's talk very quickly about what's going on in my life, in my development life, that is, not in my personal life. Let's talk about all that. That's more a topic for next week, to be honest. Long story short, my game is out. It's called Soot. It's on Steam. Blah, blah, blah. Promotion. There you go. I will talk about the development stuff, the lessons learned next week. I just released it a couple days ago. I need days. I need like a week at least to just process the whole thing. But we'll talk about like how it feels to release a game and all that stuff next week. Hopefully. I might need another week, honestly, but hopefully I'll talk about it next week. I'm working on designing my next game. Scope too big, like I mentioned. And I'm kind of thinking I might just need a breather. Like I might just need to give myself a couple weeks of just not working on games. Like maybe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but like I'm playing with that idea of just like take a second off. I just don't want it to turn into too long of a break. So that's where I'm at with my own development. And it's kind of a weird place to be. I'll talk about it more, but like right after releasing a game is a weird place, and it's really hard to convey the series of feelings that pop up for me when I finished when I finished the game was one thing, when I released it was another thing. And you know what? I'll just get into it next episode. I don't even want to try to put it into words yet. I can't. Yeah, let's wrap this thing up. Let's get to the end here. All right, we've got a couple of questions and this week's tip. The first question, and I'll answer these again. The first question is, what moment-to-moment feedback does your game provide? I'm going to answer it for my current game, and I'm going to answer for my new game idea, kind of vaguely on that one. For Soot, the one I just released, I think the feedback is quick. I think it's good, like gameplay feedback, where if you die, you know immediately what killed you. It leaves a marker where you died, so you know where you're making that mistake. You can learn from it very rapidly. I'm actually pretty happy with that. That's one of the parts of the game that I think I'm most happy with. For my new game idea, it's going to be a lot harder to design that, I think, because I'm looking at something that's a little bit slower paced. I want to make sure that there is actually moment-to-moment feedback. I want every battle in this game to have some degree of impact on the player. I don't want you to be able to autopilot through it. I want you to have to think about it. So that's going to be a little bit tricky. I think we can do it, though. I think it's doable. I think if I design it right, it'll work. Next question for you. If your game has a story, does the scale of the story have the impact that you want it to? For my first game, Soot, I don't really think it has a story, like explicit. It does. In my brain it has a story. In the game there's no dialogue or anything. So it's kind of a weird question to answer, but my answer is a little bit yes. I mean, the story is kind of just implied. The ending kind of implies a little bit, but like it's really not a story. I don't want you to misunderstand it. It's not a story. It's a ball of soot trying to escape from a fireplace. But I do think that the gameplay connects to that, right? Like I do think that there is I'm going to say barely. I'm going to say it barely has the impact that I want it to. The scale is correct. Oh, the question is, does the scale have the impact you want it to? The scale is correct. The story itself is not really executed, but that's intentional. But the scale feels right. As for the new game, I have no idea. What is the scale of this? Okay, I know what I'm looking at. It's a small scale idea. It's about an individual for the most part. And this is all, do not hold me to this. I don't even know if I'm going to make this. I have no idea. But the scale seems right to me right now. It's gonna be difficult to figure out the scope, but it is intended to be about one person going through kind of a personal journey, right? So I think I'm happy with that, and I think that's the lump of clay that I want to work with for my next project, and I think that'll help me keep the scope small. What about you? What about your game idea? Does the scale work correctly for you? Are you working with the right clump of clay? Do you have the right block of marble in front of you to start carving out? Do you want to sit down and just like start designing, write a couple things down? You know what I'm saying. Get after it. start making stuff. I'm all about it. All right. But the tip this week is actually to pause and check in with yourself and not just keep grinding. Don't just keep grinding. Take a second. Give yourself a moment. This is what I'm telling myself, and I hope that I can take this advice. And this is in life and in gaming. You ever do that thing where you're just sitting playing a game for like, this is a little too revealing about myself. Have you ever done that thing where you're just sitting playing a game for like literally a day? Where you're just sitting there, you're like, well, I just spent 6 hours straight playing this game. And for the first hour, it was amazing. And then I just like stopped enjoying it and being aware and all this stuff. And you just numb out, and then you're playing it, but you're not enjoying it. You're not engaged with it. You're kind of just suffering through the game. Like, why do that, right? But it's really hard to notice that and like notice that you're just grinding. So even if you think you're not just grinding, pause, check in with yourself, find out whether or not you're still enjoying what you're doing, and then do whatever you got to do to kind of refresh your fuel tank, I guess. Fill your fuel tank back up. That's a better way of phrasing that. That's everything for this week. I am going to mention once again, I've got the email address that you can reach out at. It's anxiousbuddhagames@gmail.com. I did hear from somebody that was wonderful. If you're listening, thank you so much for your email. I appreciate it more than I can express. Very meaningful to me to have a viewer listening and reaching out to me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who has picked up the game. Thank you so much. Anybody who's trying it out, anybody who's reviewing it, thanks a million. Everybody who's reviewed this podcast, I've got like 9 reviews on there. Thank you so much. It is phenomenal to be getting any kind of feedback whatsoever. So thank you all for that. Now, get out there, make some stuff, have a good time with it, and just enjoy yourself a little bit, yeah? I will see you in the next one. Have a good week. Bye-bye.